In this video, we're going to go over how to import data into Odoo for complete beginners. Before we can go into how Odoo works and how the database is structured, it's important that we go over some basic database terms. So if you're familiar with databases, the beginning part might be a little redundant, but I want to make this a complete guide from start to finish on how to import data and how to understand what you're importing. So we're not going to go into importing every specific model, but we'll give a few examples. And the idea of this video is to give you the knowledge in order to be able to import to anything in Odoo based on the understanding of how the database works. So we're in a test environment here. The only thing I'm going to do is go into our settings and activate developer mode. So we have access to some additional fields that we'll need to look at. So we'll activate the developer mode there. And I'm going to go over to another tab just so we can go over some basic concepts. So here we have what is a database. A database is a structured collection of data that allows for efficient storage, retrieval, and management of information. Scrolling on down, we have a few more things that we want to define. What are models, tables, fields, and records? A model is a conceptual representation of the structure and relationships of data in a database. A table is a collection of related data organized in rows and columns representing instances of entities in a database. A field is a column or attribute within a table that holds a specific piece of data or information about an entity, and a record is a complete set of data that represents a single instance or entity in a database table containing values for each field within that table. Now, I know that was a lot. You can pause it or go back to this information if you need to, but we'll explain a little bit down below. So here below we have an example of an Excel spreadsheet. You can think of this whole entire sheet as a table within the database. Each one of the columns is going to represent a field that we need to store information into, and each one of these rows is going to be a record within the database. Now, each one of these fields or columns can have certain constraints or principles that tells the database what kind of information you want to store, whether it's a number, a text field, a character field, or even relations to other parts of the database. So it's pretty common to have a field that has a key that tells it to go look up another field or record rather inside of another table within the database. And we'll see that a little bit later because it's important to understand for importing to another dimension into the table we're trying to import to. So for example, if you want to import sales orders, you'll have a sale order, but you also have sale order lines. And those sale order lines are stored in another table that we want to reference. Another important topic to discuss is the idea of keys, foreign keys, as well as external identifiers. So the first thing you want to think about is the primary key or database ID. And this is going to be the ID of the record inside of the database. So every table within a database has a list of records, and each one of those records are going to be numbered 1 to however many records you have in that table, or 0 if there's no records. You'll also have a external identifier, and this is unique to Odoo. And this external identifier allows you to uniquely identify this record across the entire database. So an ID, the number ID, so 1 to let's say 100, that is unique to that table, so this specific table, but the external identifier is unique to the entire database. So no two records within the entire database can have the same external identifier. So we'll elect to use the external identifiers when we want to reference specific records throughout the database, at least when we're importing data. Now with that in mind, let's go into Odoo and we'll take a look at some records and relate this information back. So we're in Odoo now. We're going to go to the contacts module. The first thing you want to understand is this is an application, right? We're in the contacts application or module. Each application can have one or several modules that make up the application. As you install different settings and features, that may install additional modules. But each of these modules have specific database models or extend the original model or database table that store the information of what we want to collect. So if we look at our URL in the top bar here, we'll see that the model for contacts is res.partner. Now, if we go into our list view here, again, the same view as we looked at in our little Excel view, you're going to see this contacts table. The table name is going to be res.partner, or the model name. And we have a list of records, and each one of these columns are different fields that we're going to store information into. Now, if we click into this little bug icon here that's only available in developer mode, we can see additional information about this model. We can look at the fields. So if we click on view fields here, we can see a list view of all of the fields in this model. And this will allow us to look at additional information such as the field type and whether or not it is required. So we don't see if it's required here, but we can look and click into one of these to see whether or not it's required. So you see the last updated date is not required, but this is actually going to be a calculated field. And you'll see that it is read only. So a couple more principles that we want to understand is the different data types and whether it's required or read only, or if it has a related model, will tell you whether or not you can import to it. Now, fields that are read only, you typically cannot import to, and fields that are calculated cannot be imported to. So for example, if you have a sale order, the sale order has a total field, but that total field is based on other information within the record. It's not something that you can import to because there's business logic that will compute in order to determine what the total should be. And this is a lot of information, but as you get more familiar with Odoo and importing records, you'll intuitively know what fields you can import to and which ones you cannot import to. Now, regular fields such as, let's say, name. So I'm going to search name here, and we have a name field here. This is a stored field. It's not read-only. It's a character field, and it's not required. Those are things that we can import to. Now let's go back to our contacts, and we'll click into one of these records. Let's go with Abigail here. Now, like I said earlier, each one of these records is going to have a database ID, so the number within the list that it resides. So let's see on the top of our URL bar here, we see this is ID 65. So if we were to go into the Postgres database and look at all the tables, and we pulled up our res.partner table and looked at record 65 or ID 65, we will see Abigail Peterson with all of her information. And if we went to the next record, you see ID number 66. Again, this is another record that pertains to Abigail. And if we continue on, this one is ID number 155. This is an accounting user. Again, this is just some test data. Now, if we go to our bug icon here, we can view the metadata for this record. And this will also tell us the ID. This is the database ID for that table. And again, it's on the top bar here. Now, more interesting is our XML ID, also known as our external identifier. And again, this is unique per record within the entire database. So if we ever reference this field, we can use this external identifier instead of any other information, and the system will know where it comes from and what it pertains to, so it will link to that record. Now, if I create a brand new record here, I'll just say test Kevin, and I go into our bug icon here and look at the metadata, we'll notice that there's no XML ID. But from here, we can create one. The external identifier, or the XML ID, has two parts to it. The first one is the module. And you'll notice that for module, when I'm creating it here, it says custom. This can really be named anything. The only thing you don't want to name it is the model name. So you can name it XYZ, you can name it 111 or 10101, whatever you decide to name it, that's fine, as well as the external identifier. So I can name this test Kevin if I wanted to. And now this is the combination of both of these, the module and external identifier, becomes the XML ID. And the combination of the two cannot be reused. So this entire string here is going to be unique throughout the entire database. I can save this, and now that becomes my external identifier. Now, if I import data to the system, it automatically provides us with the beginning portion of the module. It will say import, and then whatever external identifier I give it will become the rest of the information to the right here. So this information is going to be separated by a period. Now, if I didn't elect to create one of these and I just left it blank, one will be provided for me when I export the information. So if I export this data, Odoo will automatically determine the module, and it'll say underscore underscore export underscore underscore, and it will give it a random unique external identifier to the right. So let's look at that and let's test that out. So here I'm going to create test Kevin2, and I'm not going to create an external identifier. I'm going to filter my list for names Kevin. I'm going to select these 2 units, and I'm going to go to action, and I can click on export. Now this is going to bring me up a wizard that allows me to select the fields I want to export. So we'll just keep it simple here. There's a checkbox that says I want to update my data. This tells the system to only show you records and fields where I can re-upload the information. So it's not going to give me calculated fields. For example, one of the fields that are on the contact module is the invoice total, or outstanding invoice total, something along those lines, and it tells us how much this customer or vendor owes us, or we owe them. Now, that's a calculated field based on other records in the model, or the database rather. So we can't import to that record. So if I select this, it's going to limit what I can see. As you can see, it quickly refreshed, and it removes some fields to the right here. Now, all the fields to the right that it's showing me are just default fields that are typically used, and these are the fields that it's telling me that I can import to. But any of the fields to the left that I want, I can click on and import to those as well. Also important to note, when I click this, it's also going to include the external ID. You can't see the external ID here, but it will be on the export. And then you can select the file format, whether it's a CSV or an XLSX, which is the Excel format. And you can also save, if you're going to download these records often and the same fields, you can save this as a template to use in the future. So I'm going to remove all these, and then we'll just select the ones we want. So I want the name, and let's just say email, just to keep it very simple. I'll export that, and now we're going to have 3 columns. One is going to be the external identifier, the name, and the email. Let's actually export the ID too. Well, we can't import to the ID, so it's not going to show us there, so we'll not do that for now. And I'm going to open my records here. Let me close out of this other one. And here we see our external identifier, just named ID. We see the name, and we see the email. Each of these do not have an email associated with them. Now, as you can see that the system automatically created the first part of my export, or the first part of my external ID, or XML ID, which is underscore underscore export underscore underscore, and it created res partner with a string at the end. Next one is the one that I created, custom test underscore Kevin. And now we can create a new one, and we can call this whatever we want. So we can do 2 of them. Let's say this one is going to be XYZ123, and this is going to be test Kevin3. And the next one we'll say is going to be let's do 4, and we'll choose an email. We'll say this is Kevin4@test.com, Kevin3@test.com, Kevin.test.com, and Kevin2@test.com. So let's save that, and we can re-import this information. So I'm going to go on, click on favorites here. We're going to import records, upload a file. This is the one we want. Now from this import wizard, we're going to see the ID that we're importing to, the external identifier, the name, which corresponds to the name, and the email, which corresponds to email. I can test it, and then we can click on import records. Now I'm going to search for Kevin again, and we're going to see our 4 records. and the updated records. And the reason why we updated it and it knew which record to update is because we referenced the external identifier. Because we can have a contact with the same name, we can have a contact with the same email if we wanted to. So the system is looking at the external identifier to identify which exact record we want to update. Now, if I went into, let's say, Kevin 3 or 4, and we looked at our metadata, we can see import XYZ123. And if we go back to our sheet here, we know that we didn't put an ID in the beginning. We left it blank, so the system added that import module. Now, if we go to Kevin 4, where we did elect to put one, we can see that the system took X123 as we put here, and the rest remained the same. Now, the next thing I want to look at are our fields, the name, and the label. So if I went back to our contacts, and I went to our bug here, and we looked at our fields, so we're going to view fields here, and we're going to search for name. Now you'll notice that there's a field name and a field label. You can use either or when you're importing. I like to use the field name when possible because this is the exact database name, whereas the field label is the user-friendly version of the name. Sometimes they can be slightly different. This one is pretty obvious, but depending on what you're looking at, it might be very different. So here we have commercial company name as the field name, whereas the field label is company name entity. Now going back to our list view here, the next thing I want to do is actually import to something a little bit more complicated. And to do that, we'll look at our, well actually first, let's look at something. So if I go to new here and I try to save, you'll see that there's invalid field name. So we know that this name field has to be created when we create a record. Now technically it doesn't always have to be filled in depending on what you're doing in the system. But when we're creating contacts, most likely we're going to need a name. But we don't need to fill in any of this other information. But if you looked at the database model, you'll probably notice that some of this other information, maybe not on this model, but many other models, are going to be required. But the reason why we don't have to elect to put it in our import template is because Odoo will automatically fill those in based on default values throughout the system. So something might need to be, can't be blank, maybe it needs to be 0. The system's automatically going to set that default value. So only things highlighted in red when I try to save a record are things that we absolutely have to import to when we want to create a new record. So from here, let's go to our sale orders. If I create a new sale order here and I click save, we see that we need to set a customer, we need to set a price list, an invoice address, and a delivery address. So actually, if we set the customer, the invoice address and delivery address will set automatically, as well as the price list, because those fields are set on the customer record. So if we created a new invoice, or a new sale order rather, through importing them, all we really had to do was set the customer, but that's not very helpful. Maybe we want to set other information as well, such as order lines. So let's create a new template from scratch. We'll just use the same one here. The first thing we're always going to start with is an ID, which is the external identifier. The next thing we want to know is the customer. And if we look at this field, if we hover over it, we see the field name is partner_ID, so I'll use that. But it doesn't necessarily matter. And the rest of this information we don't necessarily need. But how are we going to get our partner ID? So again, for the partner ID, what we're going to use is the actual external identifier for this field. So for partner ID, I'm going to do /ID here, which is going to be the external ID for partner ID. So let me actually go back here. We're going to use one of these, so I'll create a new sheet. And this is going to be ID, partner_ID/ID. So for our partner here, we'll have a list view of our partners. Maybe we just exported them and we know who we want to import to. And let's say we're going to import to test Kevin 2. So I'm going to take this external identifier, paste it here. Now keep in mind, we can technically use the name field, But if you had two records with the same name, the system is going to give you an error. So I always elect to use the external ID instead. Now for our external ID for the sale order, we need to provide one. We can call this sale order test 1, and that's going to be the external ID for the entire sale order. The next thing we want to import to is order lines. So we want to have order lines here. So how do we know what we need to import to for order lines? So in order to do that, we can test. So if we went to, let's say, Azure Interior here, we see one line. We can hover over this. We can go into Studio. We can click on the model or the table here, and we can look at the technical name, which is order line, and that's what we want to import to. And if we wanted a template to do it again, so we can always click one of these, go to Action Export. I want to update this data. I'm going to remove all this information. What we want here is the partner or the customer. We want our order lines. Here are our order lines. So I can select order lines here. And maybe we want the product. So we're going to have to import the product and the quantity. So we're going to scroll down and look at our product. So right here we have our product. And we also want the quantity. You'll see the things that are highlighted in bold is something that is required. And we'll just import those. So we'll export that, open this, and we'll see the order line, the product, and the quantity. So here on our other template, we're going to have our ID, our partner ID, our order line, and we're going to do ID here. And lastly, we'll do, actually we want our order line, ID, and this is going to be the external identifier for the actual sale order line that we're creating. So not only does the sale order have an external identifier, but the sale order line has an external identifier because we're relating to another table within the database. So here I can name it again anything we want. So actually let's do line, and maybe remember this has to be unique. And here we can set a product ID, and we also need the unit of measure. The unit of measure quantity rather. So if I did 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2. Now the last thing we have left is to enter the external ID for the product we want to import. Now products are a little bit unique where you can import to different fields if necessary, or if you want to, you can do product name, but again, you can have multiple products with the same name. You can do the internal reference, but you can have different internal reference or the same internal reference for multiple products. And lastly, you can do barcode, I believe. I haven't tested that, but I believe you can do barcode, which have to be unique, so you might be able to use that. But what we're going to do is, again, use the external identifier. So we're going to go here to our products. And now this is a little bit more interesting. This is the most confusing part that most people run into, which is there's two models for products. There's the product template, which is, you can see on the top here. And then there's the product. Now the product template, you can think about it as the recipe to make the product. And the product is actually the product that is used, or the model that is used for most imports. Now it's not always the case, but if you hover over a field that you're going to import to, you can see what model is representing. In our sale orders, if I hover over product here, you'll see this is the product template ID. But what we really want is, we can import to that product if it doesn't have variants. But what we actually want to import to is this product variant. Now, depending on if you have product variants enabled or not, you may need to import to product variant, or you might need to import to product template. Now, I know that's a bit confusing, but keep in mind as you do this a few times, you'll get used to it, as I am here. And you might still make mistakes. Our import template might be wrong, but we'll correct that on the fly as well. So here we see the field name is product ID, which is what I exported earlier. And we need to get those product IDs. So we need to get those product IDs. So we're going to go to product variants here. And we're just going to select a few different products. We'll just do random products here. So how many do we have? We have 8. So I'm going to select 8 different products. And I'm going to click on export. We'll export this. And now we have all of the external IDs for the products that we need, and we can just paste them in here. Now keep in mind, if you're actually going to use these imports on a day-to-day basis, you'll usually have a record or several different tabs that just reference all of your products with their external identifiers. You can do VLOOKUPs to replace the products that you want to import with their external ID. It's fairly straightforward if you have some Excel skills. Otherwise, most of the time you're just going to be importing records the first time when you're creating the database. Now that we have all the records, I'm going to go to quotations here, make sure I save this. I'm going to go to import records, and we're going to test out our file. If you have a sheet or a Excel file with multiple sheets, you'll see the sheet that you want to select on the left, so we're using sheet 2. And as you see, the system automatically identified all of the fields that I'm trying to import to. We have external ID for the sale order. We have the customer's external ID. We have the order line external ID, which we created here. We have the product's external ID, order line external ID. And then we have the quantity for each of our products that we want to sell to this customer. So I'm going to test that. System's going to run through and make sure everything works well. So we did a good job. We'll import that. You'll see one record successfully imported. We created a sale order for test Kevin 2. We have all of our products down below with the quantities that we imported. And you'll notice a lot of other information was automatically filled out. The unit price was pulled from the product. The taxes were pulled from the product. The price list was pulled from the customer. The expiration date was automatically set. The quotation date was set to today's date. The invoice and delivery address were set from the customer, so it defaults to the customer's address if they don't have one specifically set. So a lot of this information you can rely on the system to automatically help you with. Otherwise, you can import to those. Now, let's say we made a mistake and we want to re-import to this. It's important that we have those external identifiers, because now if we want to re-import to this sale order line, it'd be rather difficult if we didn't have these external identifiers. So if I wanted to update all of these to 10 units, all the system is going to do is look at this external identifier and replace the quantity for each one with 10 units. Now, something I forgot to mention, which is very important, is that when we're importing to multiple different levels, so here we have the sale order and the sale order line, we're going to put the sale order once, and then all of the records that pertain to the sale order line down below without entering the information for the sale order twice. So each one of these, the system is going to know that it's going to read it, that we're creating one sale order with many sale order lines. And we can actually do this and create multiple sale orders at the same time. So if I pasted this information here, I'm going to replace this to 2. We're going to create another one for the same partner. We'll just add a few different products here. Make sure that we replace these. And we'll add some quantities. And we'll save this. So we can actually update one record while creating another one all at the same time. I'm going to click on favorites, import records, upload file, sheet 2. We'll test this, import it. And if we went here, we'll see this one was updated to 10 units for each product. And the other one that was just created has 5 units for the 3 products that we set. Now the next thing I want to look at, just so we can make a mistake and see what's going to happen, is if I copy this over, I'm going to make a new sale order. And here I left the external identifier as the same one from the previous sale order. I'm going to delete these records. We don't need them anymore. And I'm going to try to create a new sale order number 3, or with a new identifier, but the sale order line identifiers are going to be the same. So let's go to import records here. We'll test this. There's no errors. The system will allow me to import it. Now if I look at the new one that we just created, we'll see that there's 7 units of each. And if I go back to the previous one we created, we'll see that there's only 1 product on that now. Before we had 3. So because we imported it to this new sale order and we left the external identifier the same, the system took the products off of this original sale order and moved them to the new sale order. Because essentially what we're telling the system is that these 2 external identifiers that are already created and unique in the system now belong to a different sale order because we applied it to this sale order here. So it's an important thing to know. You can scramble your data pretty quickly if you make a mistake there. So make sure that your external identifiers are unique when you're managing your data. Now, just to recap, what we were able to do is identify the different fields that we need to import to, create a custom import template, and import that data into the system. When you're doing this by yourself, it's going to take a lot of practice. You're going to make mistakes. There's going to be errors that you're not sure how to identify. But if you follow these key principles, look at the field names that you're trying to import to, use external identifiers wherever you can, then you will save yourself a lot of headache. That's not going to make it extremely easy. And the last thing to keep in mind is that you can make this import easy. Let's say you want to create products. You can do so very easily. If we go to products here, and I wanted to import a list of products, if I just made a new sheet here, and we just call this name, and let's say price, or let's say cost, and we just say test 1, and I save this, I can actually import that as well. The way I showed is the more robust way of managing and importing data. Second, there we go. You see the system identified the field, and if it identified it wrong for whatever reason, or maybe you named it wrong, you can select it. But I can import this and search test, and we see all of our test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all of those products imported with the proper cost price for each one. And that was a lot easier, but it's prone to errors. And when you're importing more complex data with different relations, for example, if you're importing products that relate to specific units of measure and you need the unit of measure external ID, it's a more robust process to do it with external identifiers as we did here. Now, the last thing I want to mention before we finish the video is that for our sale orders here, there's several fields that you can import to, like I mentioned, the total or the status. Because the reason why you cannot do that is because when I confirm this, it's going to change status to a sale order. When I confirm it, things happen in the system. Business logic is triggered, code gets triggered. For example, if I confirm this, a delivery order is going to be generated. When you import something and force it to, let's say, the sale order stage, all of that business logic gets bypassed, and the system won't allow you to do that unless you are forcing it through code. So through the import wizard, you cannot just force it to a specific state often. So there's some times where you can override that, but generally speaking, you don't want to do that, and you shouldn't do that. So that's all. I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions, please let me know.